Thank you very much. My name is Leslie Daigle, and I am the Chief Technical Officer at the Global Cyber Alliance, which since the beginning of this year has been the organizational home of the MANRS activity. So today, this afternoon, I'd like to describe a little bit about what's been happening in regulatory space as regards routing security. A little bit of background first. In 2014, the mutually agreed norms for routing security activity was established by the Internet Society, and it was launched really to stimulate collective action around improving routing security. The context at the time was there was a lot of interest from governments and elsewhere to improve the state of routing security, and some proposed standards for technologies to do exactly that. However, there wasn't entirely operational belief that the standards being developed might necessarily be implementable at line speed and in actual real live networks. So the idea behind MANRS really was to focus first on what was operationally feasible and establish those as norms and work from there. So that's sort of an example of sometimes applying more thrust to an idea that doesn't fit is not necessarily a great plan. So with MANRS, the two foundational pillars were to describe an undisputed minimum security baseline, the norms, and those are called MANRS actions. And in the slides, which I'm sure you'll have afterwards, the little www link pointers will take you to the actual MANRS actions page. And then also another pillar is to have demonstrated commitment by the participants in MANRS, and that's measured and published in the MANRS Observatory. Fast forward to 2024, the U.S. government is one government in the globe that has expressed an interest in routing security. Three primary thrusts in this year. The U.S. Office of National Cybersecurity Director, the ONCD, published a roadmap for routing security. In terms of actions, it urges increased action, but it also enumerates some best practices and recommends actions, and is a good, solid list of things that organizations, networks, enterprises really should have a look at in terms of what are the things to do in order to improve routing security. At the same time, the U.S. Department of Commerce has cleared some of the roadblocks that were preventing the U.S. government itself from implementing routing security actions. As I'm sure you all are aware, the U.S. government has, since many of the early allocations of IPv4 address space were made in large chunks and to U.S. interests, the U.S. government has a lot of legacy address space, and being able to sign agreements to get ROAs established for that address space has been a bit of a challenge, but the U.S. Department of Commerce and Aaron have managed to smooth that through. So now the U.S. government can actually take care of its own networks, which is valuable. And then finally, the U.S. Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, is exploring possible rules to foster adoption of routing security measures among U.S.-based networks. So the U.S. government has taken care of its own house, and another part of it is looking at getting other organizations to do routing security as well. So the FCC issued an NPRM, a notice of proposed rulemaking, that outlined pretty much what it thinks it would like the network operators within its jurisdiction to do with regards to routing security. And in sort of broad brushstrokes, effectively the 9 largest US ISPs would have to submit a BGP plan and update it annually, identifying the ROA coverage of the prefixes that they originate, and as well as outlining their deployment of origin validation for their address base. And then once 90% coverage is achieved, reporting ROA coverage becomes optional. I would point you at Nimrod Levy's presentation at NANOG 91. That was in June of this year. And again, the little link in the presentation will take you directly there. So the nitty gritty of the NPRM is not so concerning at the moment, but the key point to get across here is that it doesn't seem like a big lift, just reporting out what it is that you're doing with routing security, but it does indicate where the FCC attention is, and it opens some questions. So, for example, network operators in the US wonder if it's reasonable to expect further rules if the FCC doesn't think the reporting trends that it receives align with their expectations. And then separately, there are some concerns that this rulemaking process might put a chill on adoption of routing security measures, as the businesses of network operators in the US await the actual rulemaking, because the NPRM is just a notice of intent or interest, might wait until the actual rulemaking before doing anything. And in some sense, there's a general feeling of waiting for the shoe to drop. So both the Global Cyber Alliance and the Internet Society provided some input to this process. It's a public process, and I invite you to read the material that we and others submitted. But this is not just to talk about, the US and what is the US doing and all that. I mean, I appreciate at the London Internet Exchange, you're only peripherally interested in what's going on in the US. But our concerns are that, of course, you can't impact one part of the routing system without impacting the entire internet. And also, the US government is hardly alone in its concerns about routing security and desire to take action within its jurisdiction. So our ongoing concerns are that any of these efforts might codify requirements that are going to change. So currently, route origin validation through RPKI is understood to be a good routing security practice. 5 years from now, is it still going to be that technology, or is it going to be something else? Will ASPA take off? Is now the time to encode ASPA and routing regulations? And we appreciate that there is no silver bullet for routing security, and rather it's a process, that technologies and requirements will change, and it's best if they can change and be adopted at operational speed, not regulation speed. Further, we're concerned that the efforts laid out in regulation may not align well with the best practices and community efforts like MANRS. So rather than reinforcing these long-term industry efforts, any of these regulatory activities might inadvertently get ahead of industry's legitimate capabilities, just as the interest in 2014 was in danger of doing, and that we might see inconsistent requirements across the globe. And that's, of course, the killer, because you can't have networks required to implement one thing in BGP in one country and treat BGP options a different way in another country and then have a consistent routing infrastructure. So I think that's the big concern in the area of regulatory interest in routing security and what is to be done with it. So what is to be done about it? So we hope that the community will continue to raise awareness of the progress that has been made in improving routing security in the last decade. If you have a look at the MANRS Observatory and other resources that report on uptake of ROAs, you can see that there is real progress being made in terms of improving the state of routing security. And we all need to continue to educate rulemakers on the need to not get ahead of industry capabilities, again, not to simply apply thrust when you think you have the right answer, because that may not, in fact, achieve the desired result. And we hope that we and others will continue to promote industry-driven efforts based on best practices and norms, because that's the way the internet has been built and will continue to have a successful future. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say about this, but I'm certainly happy to take any questions.
Okay, we got one question here in the middle.
Hi, Leslie. Rob Evans. I'm wondering if the US government is pushing ISPs to report RPKI lower adoption to it, which is 90%. Given the state Or given the current position of ARIN with legacy v4 address space and forcing users to sign LRSA, is the US government effectively forcing ISPs to sign the LRSA for legacy agreements, or is it going to force ARIN to be a bit more flexible with its services to legacy holders?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so far, the FCC regulation only applies to large network operators and not, for instance, to enterprises or educational institutions. So that there takes a lot of the legacy address space question off the table. I think the real challenge within the US is that there are, of the 9 largest operators, there are some that have done better and some that have done worse. And it's not even just a question of legacy address space, it's slowing them down. So I think you're right that there could be unintended consequences in terms of forcing agreements to be made or forcing ARIN's hand. But again, I think the primary challenge here is that the US FCC is trying to drive industry.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Any other questions? Great. Thank you very much, Leslie. Thank you for your time today.
Great. Thank you very much.